welcome to Game for Thought.
My name is Allie, and like Sandra, I work at Howest Hogeschool's Digital Arts and Entertainment campus. Here we are in our brand new live stream studio doing our second ever Game for Thought stream. So thank you for joining us again. If you joined us for our first Game for Thought stream about sex and violence in games about a month ago, if this is the first time you are joining us, welcome. If you're from Digital Arts and Entertainment, if you're from Hoest, Belgium, or abroad, or just scrolling on Twitch, we are super happy to have you here. So just to do a quick refresher, this Game for Thought series is a new series that we are piloting this academic year. And so the main point of this series is to open up space for discussion about the topics at the intersection of the gaming industry and the ethical domain. So a lot of times we find that in an industry so technical, it can be easy to kind of lose sight of the more ethically, socially relevant topics, such as tonight's topic, which is discrimination and representation in games. So really the point of tonight and all other streams is just to open up a space to talk about these sometimes controversial subjects.
So, after this small introduction, we will go over to our guest speaker for the evening, Matthijs Messely. Thank you for joining us tonight. So he is a spokesperson from Unia, which is a Belgium Center for Equal Opportunities and Opposition to Racism. So he will do a 20-minute talk regarding the topic tonight, and afterwards we will go into a small break of 5 minutes, and we will follow by the panel discussion and the audience Q&A. So for tonight, our moderator, Jeroen Bourguignon, which is a university professor at University of Ghent, he will be the moderator, and together with the panelist Kira, who is a DAE alumni, Lies de Hert, a first DAE, a first year independent game production student, Yoona Otmar, who's a second year game graphics production student, and Ruth, which is actually a West journalism student. So together, you will go over with them for the questions. And if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat on Twitch with adding Q before your questions, so it's easier for us to afterwards go over them and send them to our moderator.
So as I said before, some of the topics that we are covering during this live stream series are a little bit controversial. So I think one of our main goals going into the forming of this series was to pick some of the topics that were really and truly hot topics in the industry, but also outside of the gaming industry. So in the world in general. And we encourage you to challenge each other's opinions. I think that's, in a sense, where we grow the most. But it's really important just to keep it respectful in the chat. And again, we encourage you to say your opinions and give light to what you think is relevant in this discussion. But just keep it respectful and and understand the nuance as well of a lot of these discussions. So thank you so much for joining us again. Without further ado, I will ask our lovely technical genius Luna to cue in our guest speaker of the night, Matthijs Messely from Unia.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, Howest DAE. I hope you can hear me fine and see me fine. If so, yeah, I can see you nodding. If so, I will immediately start with the presentation. So I will just start sharing my screen. Okay, so we will discuss discrimination and representation in gaming today. So I work for UNIA, which is the Interfederal Center for Equal Opportunities. We are a public institution, so we are publicly funded. Our main tasks are actually receiving the reports about discrimination and racism in Belgium. If we feel like there might possibly be a violation against the anti-discrimination and anti-racism laws in Belgium, we will open a dossier and follow up on that. So we do not always go to court. That's a misunderstanding that there is about our organization. We will, in a large majority of cases, we will try to solve it between the parties. Just to give you an idea, in 2019, we have received almost 8,500 reports. So that's a lot. None of them become dossiers. And what we actually see is that throughout the years, every year, there is a steady increase in the reports that we receive. So it will not be different for 2020. So there's always a steady increase in those reports. What we also do is give policy advice, actually for all branches of government. So on the local level, on the regional level, but also on the national level, and sometimes internationally. That's not only UNIA, but we work with other organizations as well, of course. And we also give training and assistance. So training, those are perhaps some one-shot trainings, but we also assist for-profit companies, not-for-profit organizations or public institutions, if they have really specific questions regarding diversity in the workforce, for example. So those are the main issues, the main tasks that we actually do. So I'm a local ambassador for the region of Vlaams-Brabant, which means that all of the tasks that you see there, we try to implement them on the local level as well. So we work together with local government, we work together with local civil society to make sure that the legal framework is being implemented throughout Belgium, throughout Flanders, and so on. So the main question within our work is always what violates the Belgian legal framework for discrimination and racism. And it's really important for you to understand that that's the main task. So that's really our focus, our mission. And we always will look at it from a legal perspective. We know that racism is a much broader concept than just the legal definition, but we will definitely focus on the legal side of things. We at UNIA are responsible for 17 out of 19 grounds of discrimination that we have in Belgium. So there are 19 grounds of discrimination that are protected by law. You can see all of them underneath. It's the whole list of all the grounds of discrimination of all the protected personal traits. So it's not only about racism. The first 5 are about ethnicity, or the so-called racism issues, nationality, ethnic origin, skin color, and so on. But we also have the grounds of discrimination that are protected by the anti-discrimination law, which is about religious beliefs, age, sexual orientation, and many others. So we are not responsible for gender issues. You have the Institute for Equality of Women and Men on the national level, on the federal level, and we are also not responsible for language. That Belgium is a multilingual country, and as of today, there is no institution who is responsible for that. So just to make that a little bit clear. So the focus of today, actually the focus of the first 20 minutes, I should say, is, what does the legal framework tell us, but also engage with hot topics. So it's important to understand that if we talk about the legal framework, I will definitely represent UNIA here. But if we go a little bit broader, which is also the setup for today, I will definitely engage with those hot topics, with those topics that might be a little bit polarized in society at large. And I will definitely will speak from a personal point of view, well, as a gamer who works in the field. So there are no rules set in stone. It's really not our place as a public institution to say what is moral or what is immoral. So we really focus on the legal framework. And well, the discussion is much broader, of course, than our main mission. I think if you really take away one thing from the 20 minutes of the head start that I present here, if you take away just one thing, I hope it is that the slogan, nothing about us without us. It's a slogan that's often used within the context of persons with disabilities, but we can actually see it much broader. So if you want to speak about people, about certain groups, you should always engage with those same groups. What I will not do today is discuss dossiers because I don't have the time for it. And also because of privacy reasons, of course, we do have some that are publicly known, but yeah, we still have the time constraint. So you see a little bit of a chart underneath. So what we will typically talk about is stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. So our main mission, as I already said, is we will look at discrimination. We will look at discriminatory behavior at UNIA. But I think that there will also be some questions raised later on in the panel discussion or in the Q&A about stereotypical thinking, about prejudice. Yeah, so yeah, we will definitely engage with those points as well. So if you have some further questions or if you want to file in a report yourself, just know that you can always contact us via telephone. It's a free number. You can always contact us on the online forum at www.unia.be or at edif.be. You can find a lot more info as well. So when I was doing a little bit of research beforehand, just as a bit of a training or as an exercise more, I was just googling some headlines with the topics that we might discuss, and all of these headlines are, well, actually headlines from newspaper articles, or they might be headlines from blogs. You can see that it really lives, all these issues. They are really present in our current society. We talk about racism, but we also talk about disabilities. We talk about sexual orientation, about age or religion, and how they are related to gaming. So I really didn't have to search along to find a lot of articles or a lot of opinions on these issues. So the first topic I actually want to browse over, because just know that within 20 minutes it's really hard to grasp the whole idea of inclusion, of discrimination, of representation. I will just point out some of the issues. I really do not want to limit the discussions that will follow just to these points, but just to give a little bit of an introduction. The first thing that I thought about was hate speech, especially in the context of multiplayer gaming, but also communities that are outside of the game, gamer communities that live on the internet, in the web sphere. You can find a lot of hate speech or a lot of hateful content. And what does the Belgian legal framework say about hate speech? Well, there's actually sort of a definition which says that hate speech is to incite others to hate, discriminate, segregate, or act violently. But we also have the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is one of the most interesting, not only one of the most interesting, but also one of the most important rights that we have in a democracy. And a freedom of speech also includes insults. So if you insult somebody, it can fall under freedom of speech. But you also have the right not to be discriminated. And both of them are actually human rights, but sometimes they will clash with one another. And that's very clear when we are dealing with issues of hate speech. It's not a black and white issue, no pun intended. But we always have to work meticulously to make sure that we do not infringe on the free speech, but at the same time make sure that we defend the right not to be discriminated. Why is hate speech so important? Well, it's actually because it's not only in Belgium really important. We see that a lot of other countries have also taken legislation surrounding hate speech, because hate speech leads to violence. That's really the baseline why hate speech is considered a violation of human rights, a violation of the anti-discrimination or anti-racism law. So where does the responsibility for game developers start and where does it stop? I think we have some concrete examples that show that game developers are already engaging with hate speech, or more broadly with hateful content. They already have community guidelines. There are already codes of conduct that exist. But also communication-wise, I think, just to give a concrete example of an in-game disclaimer in support of inclusion, is the disclaimer that you can find in the Assassin's Creed series, where they say that the team who has created the final product come from all walks of life. That's actually basically what it says. I think it's important not just to have, it's just one example, but you could fill it in a multitude of ways. But it's important to have some sort of a counter narrative to hateful content. At the same time, how do you position yourself as a company or as an independent game developer on social media? How do you market your product? Those are all some questions that ensue when you are talking about communication and counter narrative. Also very important when we talk about in-game experiences is when you receive a complaint about hate speech, to investigate and to follow up on those complaints. It's not because you have a certain legal framework, and depending on where you as a game developer are or where the hateful content has appeared, the legal framework might tell you this or that, but you can always you can always be a little bit more strict if you really feel the need to make sure that there is a sort of a safe space within gaming. A second point, apart from hate speech, that I want to address is accessibility. Since 2007, 2008, there's the UN Treaty for People with Disabilities, which is really important. It's a huge step because there was a shift in the paradigm, the way we think of disabilities. We used to think of disabilities as a medical problem, which was related to one specific individual. And then because it was a medical problem, we were looking at medical solutions. But since the UN Treaty, governments try to make sure that disabilities are not seen as a medical problem, but disabilities are actually something, well, I should frame it differently, that disabilities, that there are social obstacles within society that, make sure that people with disabilities do not have an independent living the way they want to. So there are social obstacles we should overcome as a society. So that's really a different approach. First you had medical problem on an individual level. Now we see it as a social obstacle which should be addressed in society and not just on an individual level. Why is it important? It's to maximize independent living for people with disabilities and the exertion of human rights. And we talk about independent living, we're also talking about how you want to spend your free time. And then we go to the entertainment industry and we go specifically look at gaming as well. Of course, with people with disabilities, there's a huge variety in obstacles and needs. Not every disability is the same. And I think those are some of the issues that we might delve into later. Just some examples of that huge variety. For example, color blindness. It's something, I think 8% of men are affected by color blindness. So we see that that's already being addressed by certain games. And then I'm specifically thinking about Portal, where you have one portal that's blue, and the other portal is orange, because they're contrasting colors. And I think all, if not most, of people with color blindness could distinguish between those two colors. You also have people with hearing or visual impairment. How are you going to make sure as a game developer that you provide settings that are adaptable enough in the video and in the audio sphere to make sure that people with hearing or visual impairment can actually play the game as well? You also have physical disabilities. Can you mediate those physical disabilities perhaps through hardware? You have the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which is a relatively new thing that tries to mediate physical disabilities. We can also talk about learning disabilities, like can you provide some sort of a gamification of education? Would that help people with learning disabilities? That's also an open question. When we talk about accessibility in all sorts of fields, so also in housing or in education or in the work field, we talk about universal design. And what universal design actually means is that it's design that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible. So really to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So that's something to keep in mind as a game developer. How can I make sure that the things the things that I include in the game, that they are as relatable for as many people as possible? So we can also talk about representation. Why is there a certain need for representation? Well, I think there are two broad reasons we can distinguish. First of all, ethical reasons, of course, because there have been misrepresentations in certain games in the past, which were actually really harmful. I think one that's almost comical to speak about is Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! It's a game in the 80s, and it's been used many times in the past as a really bad example of very stereotypical thinking, which might be very harmful. The characters that appeared in the game were not really great. They were very stereotypical, but also to provide a rich narrative actually in the game. If you take into account what has been happening in history, when we're talking about issues like slavery, for example, or just racism in the past, segregation. There are games that are already who have already tried to include some of those aspects in the game. And then I'm thinking about Red Dead Redemption 2 or Assassin's Creed Black Flag. They had storylines that really addressed those issues, maybe not thoroughly enough, but they really browsed, they touched upon the subject, so that's important. There are also some commercial reasons why a game developer would feel the need to make a more diverse representation in game. Those commercial reasons are more pragmatic, I think, but they are a reality. If we talk about perhaps ethnicity or maybe more about nationality, you can see, for example, that there are emerging markets. So then we talk about all the markets that are outside of North America or Western Europe. So it's really interesting to address those markets as well, and also the changing demographics in key markets. So also in North America and Western Europe, you see more diversity. So it's only a logical conclusion to also make sure that those people feel represented in a game. But it's not only an issue of ethnicity. So but this was just one of the examples that I could give. What we see actually now is that, a lot of people are actually talking about a coming of age of the gaming industry. So the focus on a richer narrative. Last of Us, the game was hailed as a big step forward by many, but this also brings to the forefront more questions, new questions, more pitfalls perhaps. how diverse are your playable characters or non-playable characters? Aren't we exoticizing or romanticizing the narrative? It's easy to do so if you're talking about racism in a historical context or about slavery, for example. How are you dealing with inconvenient truths in a current or historical context? And those questions are especially relevant on a structural level. As a game developer, are you making sure that you are throughout the broad spectrum of games that you produce? Is there enough diversity, more so than just one specific title? However, one specific title of a game can have a really profound impact. There's that focus on a richer narrative in a game really shows that you can have a profound impact on people in a positive or in a negative way. And then lastly, game developers as equality agents. By that I mean that we are not just looking at game developers who produce a certain end product, the game itself, but actually everything that happens within a certain company. Now I'm actually talking about game developing companies, much more than independent game developers who work on their own. Game developers can be equal rights employers as well, so they can focus on the well-being at work, the harassment maybe that ensues. They can also focus on the accessibility of buildings, but also on specific types of jobs. And also, how are you recruiting? What are the existing thresholds? Is there a lack of diversity? Are you not just not discriminating within your recruitment, but are you also making sure that your workforce is a representation of society at large? If not, do you want to do something about it? And of course, because you exist in an entertainment industry, you also have a social responsibility, just like many other companies. How are you going to engage with your audience, and how are you going to engage with people who are perhaps not gamers? So with society at large again. So that's it. I see that I have just managed to stay within time. And that's it for now.
Okay, welcome everybody to the second part of the evening, the part in which we'll have a debate. As you know, the entire goal of these Games for Thought series is to explore the role of ethics in the DAE curriculum and to explore certain perspectives that were underrepresented in the curriculum. And today you're in for a treat because we're going to explore a number of topics. And we have gathered a number of students to join us in the conversation. So unlike last time where you had some people from the gaming sector as well, now we really want to give the floor to the students themselves. Obviously, we have Matthijs. You've all met Matthijs. But next to Matthijs, we have 4 more wonderful people here. We're joined by Kira. Kira, who studied independent game development here at DAE. Right now, they are studying international business management at Artevelde Hogeschool. Kira already mentioned that they're not playing video games anymore due to misrepresentation of specific people in video games. So that would be very interesting to talk about in the next couple of minutes. Then we have Lise de Hert here as well. Lise is a first-year independent game development student here. Lise is a member of the LGBTQ plus community and really a human rights activist. So happy to have you here, Lise. Then next to Lise, we also have Ruud Koppens. Ruud does not study here at DAE, but she is a journalism student and really a gamer, though, and wanting to build an entire career about video gaming and journalism. And then last but not least, we have Yoona. Yoona is a second-year game graphic production student. Sorry, for me, all those terms are a bit new. But Yoona really wanted to mention that they are a queer, non-binary person. So, and they are very much into the representation of people in video games and really conscious about what's happening in video games right now. So what we're going to do, and this is important for everyone following this stream, we're going to go over some questions that students themselves submitted in the first half an hour of this debate, and then afterwards there will be some time for the people in the stream themselves to ask some questions to our panelists. For me, it's very important to mention that these students here, they're not game scholars. They're not people who have studied feminist theory, queer studies, or gender studies for a very long time. These are students bringing their own perspectives today, so I'm very grateful that you're all here to join us and to discuss these topics with us. And let's start with the topic of representation, because we know that something is going on. If you take a look at the figures of last E3, for example, there we noticed that female protagonists in video games, they only made up for like 5% of all of the video games. And so women are really underrepresented in video games. And if they are represented in games, they're often sexualized, objectivized, scarcely clothed. So there's all sort of things going on there. And then if you take a look at the men in video games, well, we see that they're mostly portrayed as being very aggressive. They're the bodybuilder types. So obviously, there's something going on with representation in games. And we've heard Matthijs talk about representation and how things are changing. But I wanted to ask to the other panelists, and first I wanted to direct a question to Ruud. Why do you think it is that game journalists now are picking up this idea of representation, and why do you think it's important that we do?
Well, why do I think it's important that we do? Because the world is changing. The way we perceive things is changing. So I think it's important for them to point it out, especially if it's done in the wrong way, like over-sexualized, or like for men, the strong bodybuilder types. What was the second part of the question?
Well, why do you think it's changing? And then
why do I think it's changing? Because, well, as I said, because the world is changing as well. Because we are, as a society, accepting more that women are gamers as well, accepting more that, for example, Black people are part of our community as well, accepting these things more, and therefore it becomes more important that they are represented properly as well.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps going over to Lisse, we now notice that game companies are changing their policies as well, and they're really directing attention to representation. Think about Ubisoft hosting panels about it on E3, etc. Why do you think that game developers are picking up the pace as well?
I think because it has also been demanded by a lot of the public in all forms of media, and because it's catching on in every media, so they don't want to fall behind and get hated on for that.
Mm-hmm. And for many people, I've heard that they feel, a lot of game developers feel like, well, this is really some extra work going on. Things were fine. We had video games. People played video games. We loved them like they were. So an often heard argument is, well, if people feel underrepresented or they feel misrepresented, why don't they just play other games? And I wanted to ask the question to Matthijs. It's an often heard argument. I think it's a bit of a naive one, but what can you say about it?
Well, the game developing companies actually have a lot of power. I don't know if they always are aware of the fact that they have a lot of power, but as I already said in the presentation, I believe that like a lot of other companies, they have a social responsibility. If they are the ones who control what their product looks like, how they are going to engage with the audience, it's really important that they are aware of the issues in society and also the questions that come from interest groups or from individuals as well. So if they're aware of those questions and if they're aware of the topics, yeah, they will engage with it and hopefully include in the games as well. So yeah, they have a responsibility. They have a social responsibility because they do not operate in a sort of a contextless vacuum. They present their products in a society which finds the topics very important. So yeah.
So what you see is that game companies are starting to change how people are represented in video games, but obviously that's only one part of the solution, because we have a lot of different people here in the room, and we know that, for example, the other players you're joined with in online multiplayer games, that can be part of the problem as well. There's a lot of hate speech going on. You talked about hate speech. Seeing a lot of diversity here in the panel, I'm thinking that you must have your own stories about being confronted, about being a woman, being different. Those stories are being documented. They are well known. There's this website, it's called Fat, Ugly, Slutty, who collected all of these stories of people and the bigotry, etc. So we're not going to go into these horrifying stories, and I'm sure you all have some of those. But I'm just wondering, if you're confronted with that kind of hate speech, what does it do with you as a gamer? And I wanted to ask the question first to Kira, because, well, we already know what it did to you.
Yeah, I quit gaming. I mean, it's you don't want to go into a space where you know you're not going to be welcome, or like they don't even necessarily even have to attack you personally, but just the fact that they throw insults around like it's just, I don't know, like it's normal to say, oh, it's gay and mean bad, that's the same meaning. So yeah, you in real life you get to walk away from people to a certain extent, right? Avoid those places. But in a game like Lineage 2, I used to play a lot. It's an MMO. Everyone you encounter is anonymous, and everyone could be the next person that, you know, makes you feel like crap. So yeah, obviously you start playing single person games, but then you enter into the representation issues, and then you run out of games. So that answers another question. Eventually you run out of games, you run out of storylines, and you decide to spend your time and money elsewhere. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yoona, can you tell us something about that? Have you experienced that kind of hate speech as well?
Well, yes, it is very difficult for someone who is audibly not just a dude to be in gaming spaces, because I used to think that it was exaggerated before I started playing multiplayer games with voice chat, and it is very hard to play a game and not have, oh, you're a woman, you're a lady, you're a girl, which obviously it has the whole, okay, now I'm gonna get like insults thrown at me, but as a trans person, it also just makes you feel very terrible about how you present yourself, and how people can just hear that you're, you know, not what you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's this American sex educator who mentioned, and he actually started the whole It Gets Better project, and he mentioned that if you're just a boy or a woman being harassed online, you can go back to your parents, if you're lucky to have parents, loving parents, and you can see how they grew up and how it got better for them and how you can pull through and how there's a future for you, etc. But if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, it's often harder to find those role models at home as well. So then you come home and you don't see how it can get better, and then it's even harder for you, I guess. So we come to the LGBTQ question, and I think for LGBTQ people, the problem is even more profound. They are often flat out ignored in video games, or being very badly misrepresented. And I had to think about Adrian Shaw, who's a brilliant game researcher, who mentioned, well, perhaps it's even better not to be represented at all than to be represented this badly. Kira, do you have some examples of games that really were flat out wrong?
Well, there's this one example I mentioned earlier to you about Fire Emblem, where it kind of crosses the line into, conversion therapy almost, having. And then there's the GTA. I think there's a GTA example as well. It's a lesbian police officer, and yeah, I mean she's molesting someone that's conventionally considered attractive. The body types used to represent the victim and the assault, the person committing the assault also says a lot. So yeah, there's plenty of examples. And I mean, a game I actually picked up recently, I started gaming again this summer, because obviously what else do we have to do, right? But it's games that from my childhood started Tales of Symphonia, and then I played through the others, and it's Tales of Vesperia. And there's this one character, and he's super queer coded, and then he gets murdered by the lead, by you basically, or you basically let him die, and it's what kind of message are you sending here, right? Okay, so it's good that he dies. We're supposed to hate this person. Flamboyant people are bad. Yeah, it's not. It's better than not to be represented if that's what you're gonna show.
Mm-hmm. And then we talked about Birdo, for example, which is probably the most well-known example. It's the bird from the Super Mario games, in which the booklet said, well, this is a male bird questioning his identity, and then he's wearing a ribbon to represent his struggle or something. But you can really tell from the booklet that they mean it in a harmful way.
Yeah, it's played as a joke, like Birdo's gender identity, or at least his or her questioning of it. The problem is, of course, we don't know what pronouns Birdo prefers, because the game just makes fun of it. But yeah, it's one of those things, right? It's always played as a joke, as something that's not serious, and yeah, it's played as something alien. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose both you and I have probably had some of those experiences where people just don't really want to know, or don't care to know, or it's a joke, or it's too strange, and they refuse to a simple accommodation such as pronouns. So yeah. So
Yoona, do you have specific experience with that? How does it feel as a non-binary person to have almost no safe haven in video gaming?
It's kind of sad, but I've gotten used to not seeing myself in any. The only non-binary character that I can even think of is from Shira, and that's just an alien. So it always, whenever they do it, it feels very dehumanizing. So at some point, I've gotten used to just not seeing it, and trying to, either through, making playable characters, just thinking of my own character as non-binary, even though they don't even give you that option. So, yeah.
I want to direct a question to Matthijs as well. We're not really going into racism during this debate, but I noticed that it's a lot of black people having the same experiences, experiencing racism in online games, and then having been told that just be a man, just man up, come on, you can take this. What does it do with people to be confronted with this type of messages all the time?
Well, of course, I cannot speak from personal experience, but when I was doing a little bit of research beforehand for this evening, I came across one article that I found really interesting, where an author who is black described the way he felt when he grew up with games, that he didn't feel represented in games, but now the last couple of years he noticed that there is more attention going to it, and also what he describes actually is, well, not to shy away from historical context if it's a game set in history. And the second thing that's really important is how are you going to portray relationships between different characters? Are you portraying them in a very stereotypical way? Are you having like a good guy, bad guy narrative where one person is one skin color and the other is another skin color? Are you indeed romanticizing some of the experiences? And he was actually really glad. It's actually him that I found that I used two examples from. He was the one who said that he really felt. He said that when he played Red Dead Redemption 2 and Assassin's Creed Black Flag, that he got a first sense of finally game developers are dealing with issues like slavery or systemic racism in the past. He said it's not perfect, it's really not there. And yeah, I think that goes for a lot of groups actually, that change doesn't come rapidly, it's always incremental change. And yeah, it always takes a very, very long time for these adjustments to be implemented, which is a pity, of course.
And you mentioned in your talk that there's like two major issues driving that change. It's on the one hand, it's the societal push. On the other hand, it's the market pull, targeting broader audiences. And I wanted to ask to Lisse, how do you feel about that argument that we should include more diversity in video games because then we can make more market revenue by video games?
I think it's important to represent more in video games because it helps normalize. And it does appeal to different people, but I don't think it should be as much as a marketing strategy to represent in video games as it should be about actual representation.
Mm-hmm. And can you pinpoint at what point in time does diversity in video games or representation becomes exploitation? There were some questions from your peers, from other students like Gert Braakman, Matthijs de Rijker, etc., who all asked, yeah, what about queerbaiting?
Queerbaiting is a very big issue on its own. It can definitely be harmful, and it
perhaps,
can
sorry to interrupt you, but perhaps we should first explain what queerbaiting is to the audience.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Queerbaiting is when, in a form of media, there will be a hint at an LGBTQ plus relationship or an LGBTQ plus character, but it will later be completely ignored. There will be nothing else on it, and the character will be represented as straight or again, which is an issue. And it definitely might be done to attract LGBTQ people to your game and as a marketing strategy, but I don't think it's a good one because, well, it will attract those people, but then they will not get what they wanted, and they might get angry for that.
I see the rest of the panelists nod. Do you have the same feeling, Ruud, for example?
I fully agree with what Lisa said. Using queerbaiting as a marketing ploy basically is very harmful to the community as well, and I don't think they deserve that. If you want them to support your game, just don't do queerbaiting. They will support your game if you have actual representation in it, and not queerbaiting.
Well, and then by queerbaiting, it's just hinting at relationships. But then the other end of the spectrum, you have including as much diversity as possible to appeal to a certain audience. At what point does that become exploitation? Kira, do you have an opinion on that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one. The question should maybe a bit more nuanced, I think, in the sense of if your target audience is the queer community, and the people producing it are giving it due attention and preferably hire people to tell their stories and then make a game with proper background information and consideration, then I mean, sure, because I mean, isn't that what the gaming community has been doing for straight white men all along, anyways? So, but obviously, there's definitely that line between who is making this game, who is profiting from these narratives, right? I mean, we've seen it all the time, you know, like cultural appropriation is a good example of that. You can represent other cultures respectfully, sure, but like who's going to benefit from that at the end of the day? Like if it's just going to be the white CEO again cashing in, then yeah, what's the point, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right now we're having an audience of a lot of people wanting to go into game development, so there's an opportunity here to change things. So I was wondering if you take a look at how we have been discussing mental disabilities, for example. In Flanders there used to be this award, and it was called the Inclusieve Griffel, and it was a prize for children's literature that depicts people with a mental disability as just a regular character next to other characters. It could be the main character, it could be a side character, but the mental disability would not be the core of this person's personality. It would not. The whole story would not revolve just around the idea that someone had a disability. Right now, we're seeing that in gaming, that Electronic Arts and Gaming Magazine are hosting on February 24th the first Gaming Awards, so Gaming Awards. I was just wondering, if you would be the organizer of such an event, what would be the criteria for video games to win such an award? Perhaps first go to Yoona.
Yes, I think that obviously the on-screen representation has to be genuine, that it wouldn't just have to be like, we just call this character gay and then the gays will buy our game. But I also think that an important part would have to be that they're actually the people that you're representing, that they were the ones who worked on the game. I think that's very important.
So having a diverse team would be one of the criteria as well.
Yes.
There's a concept for that.
Because I think, yeah, it's very easy to just excuse things as being like, oh, they didn't understand, but it is not hard to just hire the people that you're writing stories about.
I think, if I allow me to add on that, I think if you're portraying a certain experience that these groups go through, it's also important to listen to their experiences and how they deal with these to help you portray your story, and not just think about what do they go through, but actually listen to those people.
So yeah, that's like what we see often is the representation without participation, and that's what we don't want, definitely.
Well, I now that you're mentioning, I have to think about Gone Home. I don't know if some of you have played the video game. It was praised by a lot of LGBTQ gamers as being an inclusive story, until the criticism came and arose that the entire team that made Gone Home was actually a straight male team, and so that sparked a lot of debate. Is that really such a problem? Is it a problem that an almost entirely male straight team creates a game and tries to depict what it means and tries to research how it feels to be different?
I would say so. I mean, there's a couple of issues here. One of them is, profiting of someone else's experiences, obviously, without actually paying them. Because if you're going to do desk research, I've done desk research all the time. But yeah, I'm not profiting from that research, like I'm not taking someone else's experiences, someone else's knowledge, someone else's time and effort. Like just hire someone, pay them, be the consultant, sure, but pay them, or just hire full-time employees that can actually, because throughout the entire development process, things are going to come up that someone who's queer might notice that you just want, and yeah, that's definitely a starting point. I don't know if someone else wants to add to that.
I think you're very right. Like people often they will say that they don't understand why something is an issue, but then they also aren't prepared to listen to why the minorities feel like that is an issue. I also think that it's just a basic part of writing a story, doing research. So I don't know why someone wouldn't collect references for their art, for example. It's a basic part of it.
Okay, so we agree. No award for Gone Home. Are there games that spring to mind that you think those are the games that are really doing it right? Ruud, for example, do you have some examples in mind?
I've been seeing a lot of hype, and I've played it as well, for Hades for representation. But you can also choose which way you go there, whether you go straight or gay or whatever. So I don't know if any of the LGBTQ communities played it here, but I've seen a lot of hype for it from the community. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, I have certainly seen it as well, but I haven't played it. For one,
really
I
good.
mean, I'm not that interested in violent game. I mean, sure, yeah, it's violent, right? I mean, you have to fight and stuff, so I'm not really that interested in that anymore. Violence doesn't really appeal to me. And also, like, the lead character is also a man, and yeah, sure. I mean, it has some very nice stories, and like I said, a lot of people liked it, but it's not my cup of tea. But it's certainly progress. So
now, this whole idea of you have to have diverse teams to create diverse stories. It reminds me a bit of the whole dilemma that Hollywood is having right now, where people are wondering whether it's okay for straight white actors to take on the roles of minority groups, for example. And then I think of Bill Maher, the person really standing up against all of the woke and all of he's wondering, isn't that just acting, playing someone else's role? And I wanted to ask to Matthijs, what is wrong with a white person playing a black person, for example, or like in the Bob Dylan movie, a woman portraying a man or something?
Well, it has a lot to do with power relations. That's what most of the criticism is actually based upon. The fact that history has been predominantly dominated by white people. Those are the real issue. There is who has the power, and it's also something that I think it was Kira who already touched upon it. Is it again another white CEO who will profit off of the experiences of other people? In history, roles in film and TV have always been attributed to white people, except when they really, really didn't need to be. And now we can. Now there's more of a shift, but not everybody implements it. But there's a shift towards really anonymous casting, where you would write a role that's not necessarily black or white, but you just write a role with certain characteristics and you just see who shows up to the casting, and then you just cast the actor who fits the bill the most, just to make sure that you have a diverse team. And I think, that's if you are doing the same for voice acting and you notice that you have an all-white cast, for example, or an all-straight cast, I think there are some issues with your recruitment process. So does it necessarily, with voice acting have to be a black person who plays a black character in a game? Not necessarily, but I think we have to look more on a general level. Is the team diverse enough?
Kira.
I, for one, think that here there is a case for positive discrimination, because it's in terms of opportunities available to these people. And that's what you're doing. You're taking another opportunity away. So in that sense, I do think we should take that into account. I mean, I do believe in a society where there would be no discrimination, everything would be fair and equal. I probably wouldn't care if a woman plays a transgender role because the transgender actress will then get access to other roles but that's not the case right now. So as long as you don't have an equal playing field, you should compromise on those ideal ethical standards and compromise and make sure that those that don't have those opportunities do get them when they are made available.
Mm-hmm. So
if I can just add a little bit on that, I totally agree with you. However, when we talk about it, we wouldn't use the term positive discrimination. It's also something that I used in my slide. If you notice that there is a certain equality that exists and you want to do something about it, in a work situation, we would actually use the term positive action to make sure that the inequality ceases to exist. So you want to make sure that in your workforce, in your team, you have a more of a representation. You actually implement some positive actions, and those could be very, very, very broad. Here in Belgium, it's also a very new ground. So yeah, I cannot really give many examples, but you see that it's slowly starting to be implemented into the workforce. So I wouldn't use the term positive discrimination, but rather positive action to indeed make sure that those inequalities cease to exist. But yeah, I totally agree with your point of view, Kira.
Thank you for the correction. I'll keep it in mind going forward. Thank you.
So, on the one hand, most of us agree that hiring more LGBTQ designers, more female designers, will help us not only to create deeper and more meaningful stories. It will also help us to create safe havens for people really needing those in video gaming. But on the other hand, we do already have a lot of men in the gaming industry, and I must say, I don't know whether games are really a safe haven for men. If you look at the representation of men in video games, I can see how things are going wrong there either. So I'm wondering, is just hiring a more diverse team enough to create this? So what can we do to stimulate game developers to really pay attention to this representation issue? Yoona?
Yes, I think the way that what goes wrong with male representation in games right now is also a result of those male-dominated spaces, because men very often they enact this expectation on each other to be manlier, to be the manly man, the big buff guy. But I think if you hire more diverse people who don't have those don't feel like those restrictions are on them, it will also encourage the men actually working, just white straight men, to be less worried about being as straight as they can be, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to add? What can we do to enforce this? Do we have to enforce this on game developers, or should there be guidelines, or how do we regulate this?
I think that part of regulating that is not minding whether or not the person you're hiring, what their sexuality or ethnicity is, just ignoring that and looking more at their resume rather than who they are. Mm-hmm. And I agree that toxic masculinity is definitely a problem on its own that should definitely be touched. But I feel like it's a different issue than a representation and discrimination of minorities.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I recently had to do some research on the difference on gender expectations in Taiwan, and I came on an interesting study that compared Taiwan to mainland China, and how during the communist era of Mao Zedong and stuff, because the government infiltrates your personal life, making positive change is also easier than in a democratic capitalist society as Taiwan. And then you see that during that age, like gender relations were a lot more even. Like they're regressing now again, but they were a lot more even at the time. Whereas if you look at Taiwan's more familiar, there's a lot more patriarchy at play. So, and we do have regulations in certain places that you have to have a minimum quota of women in certain spaces. I think we have that with the student council as well here at Howest. So there are certain regulations, but obviously we often, like if you were to say, okay, well, Belgium, make sure you have 20% of non-white people in your companies. Well, I don't think that would be as easy as we want it to be, certainly in certain areas. But it is certainly something interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're going to say like have 20% of non-white people in your company, that people are going to be hired just because they have a different skin color and just because they have a different ethnicity to get to that quota rather than them being competent people, which is also an issue.
I also, if I can also add to that, I think that also won't solve the problem of how they are treated, because if you are just hired because you are a different race or because you are a different gender, then I feel like you will be treated differently as well. You'll be treated as if you don't belong, which is obviously a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, there has been this movement in 2012. There was a Twitter hashtag, and it was called One Reason Why, and this was women and non-males speaking up as to why it was not that feasible to work in the gaming industry as a non-male. I was just wondering, can we do the opposite today? Because we really want to encourage women and LGBTQ members to become part of the game development scene. Can you name one of the reasons why you started studying video games as a journalist or as a game developer? We'll start with. I'm just going to take the order on the screen, so we'll start with Ruud.
To make a change about the way we speak about representation, because now it still often has very negative connotations, and I would like to get rid of that.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, what's it for you?
I grew up playing video games, and I think it's very important for there to be more diverse characters so people can recognize themselves in video games. And I would also like to bring the joy that I had during my childhood to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yoona?
I would want to, normalize it. I don't want to just be hired because I am non-binary. I want people to not see those things anymore and to just act normal about it.
Mm-hmm.
So the more non-binary people, the more, people of different genders are in the company, the less you will be seen as the non-binary person.
Mm-hmm. Kira, sorry, Matthijs, I'm skipping you. Kira?
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer this question, honestly, especially considering that I stopped game. I mean, I used to game quite a lot when I was younger, stopped at 18, give or take. And I don't know. I mean, I honestly, I do think that the degree I have and you guys are pursuing is certainly interesting, and I love the creative expression that allows me, to manifest, but yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll be going into the industry because again, yeah, you can become, as you've pointed out, like some kind of token minority, and you become token diversity and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, maybe in a different role, which is not uncommon if you look at statistics of women in the industry. More often than not, you have to be careful who is counted and what positions they're counted, right? Considering what I'm studying now, I might become one of those statistics. So yeah.
Okay, we're going to go over to the Q&A with the student questions. The only problem is my computer locked itself, so I can't enter these questions. So if someone could come and help me fix this, that would be that would be great. But in the meanwhile, just one more question. specifically for Lissa and for Kira, until what age do you want to become? Do you want to be a game developer?
I don't have an age where I want to stop being a game developer. I don't see how age could be an issue with that.
Well, the reason why I ask it is because as you look at the gaming industry right now, you often see that it's a very hard and a tough industry. And if we're talking about DAE students, we know that you guys are good. I'm in the VAV Game Fund where we give money to young game developers to develop their games. And we know that if you give it to a DAE person, these are hard workers. And I know why, because your teachers know that this industry is tough, and they make it no secret that they want to build character and make sure that you have what it takes to make it in this industry. But then I always wonder, is this toughness of the game industry, is it a given? Should it be this tough, or can we really change it? Because do you want to work in a sector where burnout at like 35 or 40 is not that uncommon? Lissa?
I think so. Sorry. I think it's definitely doesn't have to be as tough, but there is definitely a certain standard that is expected from gamers as well from the video game that makes it this tough, because you have to work a lot and the quality has to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I think he said Kira earlier, but I'm pretty sure he meant Yoona. So.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I just, it's very discouraging. I'll be honest. I have thought about it, and I just hope it'll get better before I step into the scene. But my cynical part of my brain knows that it won't be, so I'll just have to see.
Well, Ned, you hear these stories about recruitment, how it's sometimes hard for women to get into the industry, because one of the main recruitment questions seems to be how well are you invested in the gaming culture? So how much of a gamer are you yourself? And I was just wondering when I read that, do you need to be a gamer to make really good games?
I don't think so. I think you should be able to enter the industry without being a gamer, as they call it. I think that you can be a good 3D artist or be a good programmer without having played as many video games. But I think there's definitely certain parts of the game development process that require some insight on how will this work in a game, how will this story best be told within the game.
Mm-hmm. Kira? No, sorry, again. Yoona?
I think it depends on the position that you're looking for. Obviously, if you're a game designer, it'll be a plus point to play games. But I think if you're like Lisa said, just an art person, a 3D modeler, you don't really have to be a gamer to be able to make art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that. But then again, I noticed that there's some women saying, well, yeah, but I'm only hired because I bring the feminine touch, for example. Or if I'm not doing these other types of things in video gaming, it's because, well, then I really have to man up. So if it gets to coding, I still really have to do a lot of effort and able to prove myself. Do you see that? Is that still a problem? Because if you read up on it, people seem to say, well, sexism it's a thing of the past. We're moving past it. Is that the case? Do you feel like that's the case?
No, I don't think sexism is something of the past, and it's something still very present. Maybe not as visible, or people don't wish to admit that they're sexist anymore. But I think it's definitely still an issue and in every industry that should be handled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that you can see, and that's sometimes a bit curious to me, how the gaming industry tends to believe or think about itself that it's very creative, very progressive, and then you compare it to these other fields like law or finance or architecture, and there you have seen these struggles of women and non-males having these struggles have been fought for like 20 years, and it's only now that we're starting to discuss this in the last 10 years in video games as well. So for me, that sometimes it causes a lot of cognitive dissonance just to think about that, having this creativity on the one hand, and then having these outdated labor perceptions, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose much of that may have to do with, the tech industry as a whole, if you look at it. I mean, but the simple fact that most people in the game industry have absolutely no unions is I mean, that says a lot, if not enough, how backwards it is. So, yeah, certainly. And, yeah, I do believe that if you look at how much sexism there is, we do really live in a bubble. I mean, I can't deny that. And in terms of programming for women, I think I think Robin, for one, during our last stream is maybe a good example of that. Yeah, he's not a programmer. And no one, and maybe people expect him to be able to, but yeah, it's not the case. And then you have other people that are women programmer, but they get questioned. Yeah, it's a bit all backwards. So I do think there's a lot of progress still needed, because even the people championing change, they still have so many unconscious biases that show. Yeah, people really underestimate how much still needs to be done. So,
Okay, so behind the scenes, everybody is doing their ultimate best to provide us with the questions of the students in the chat as well. And let's go over some of these questions that are springing up. So first question, I do think it needs perhaps a bit of context and I miss it, but first question goes, when does an ethical issue becomes a political issue as well? Is there someone wanting to take this question?
I don't mind. I think the question is, like, you can't separate anything ethical from political and the other way around either. Like, everything is going to be political, because isn't that the point of politics, defending your ethics and setting them as a standard in society? So yeah, I don't, and that's one of the things that I do struggle with. Like, many people say don't bring politics into it, but politics are ethics, and you can't separate those two. You can't tell me not to be ethical about something and demand a certain ethical standard. So I saw a journalist student, I'm sorry I forgot your name, react, but I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
It's Ruth, and I see that argument a lot when it's about gay people, for example. Don't bring politics into video games, but then they play Call of Duty, for example, which is a war game, which obviously has lots of politics in it. So I think it's a bit of a backwards argument, in my opinion, and I hear it and see it a lot, and I don't like it. Because, as you say, everything's politics.
Lisa, do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely think that politics comes in a lot of different forms and ways, and will definitely come into it. And indeed, if you're gonna play a game that's about a political story, and then you're gonna be difficult, don't bring politics into games because people want representation, that you're a bit hypocritical.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question from the chat is, are gender and race quotas an effective and morally ethical way to diversify employees in gaming workplaces? So, Matthijs, you already mentioned something about taking positive action. What do you think about quotas?
What do I personally think about quotas? Well, I think they could be a very useful tool. Quotas have usually been used in a rather binary context of gender. I don't think, unless I'm overlooking something, I don't think they really have been implemented on other fields. No, I'm mistaken. Actually, on disability, there have been quotas as well within government. But outside of that, especially in a Belgian context, they aren't used much. And I think, yeah, what I discussed earlier, positive action, I think that might be an even more useful tool. But again, it really depends on what context, because when we're talking about quota and we're talking about gender, there is legislation in Belgium. If you want to, if there are elections, you should have an equilibrium between the two binary genders. Or in the boards of companies. It's also sometimes used. But that's a rather closed-off setting. I think in the more general sense, if we are truly investigating thresholds that are experienced by some people and doing something about it, which could be very different. The approach doesn't always have to be the same thing. But if we're looking at positive actions, yeah, I think as a more general term, personally, I feel it's more effective. It's more useful.
So I understand the term, but can you make it concrete? What kind of measures do you take if you want to take positive action? Is it like making sure that people can maintain a proper work-life balance? Is it what do I have to understand under positive action?
Positive action is, there's also a definition. I don't know it by heart, but there are some key elements that are really important. So there is an existing inequality, and you try to resolve it by taking a temporary measure. And by temporary, it means until the problem is fixed, when the inequality is fixed. And it might be, for example, if I look at the work that we do, we have advised the city of Genk, for example, on some questions that they have, because they noticed that for the very diverse city that Genk actually is, they noticed that on the A levels and B levels within their own administration, there were actually very few people with ethnic backgrounds outside of Belgium. So what they actually did is they started a project called Springplank. I don't have the English translation right now, but it's actually to offer an internship to people who might not have the right qualifications based on where or in what they graduated, but to make sure that they have some work experience, and that might lead to a job on a higher level that they have right now. So that's for example an internship. So and it really doesn't mean lowering standards, or it doesn't mean inviting somebody as a token employee. No, it's actually really to assist them in becoming someone in the workforce.
Mm-hmm. So it's offering more training opportunities. It's making sure that you feel safe at work. It's making sure that you can work in the best of the circumstances, etc. Okay, so let's go over to yet another question. Considering the current topic being discussed, so what do you guys actually look for in a game? Do you look for a platform to have fun, or do you look at a platform that tries to please all parties involved? And I think that's sometimes the question. Do all games need to be this form of art, or can they just be for fun? And if it's just for fun, do we really need to take into account representation? Kira, I can see.
Yeah, like one of the things I really often see is like the realism thing, you know, like does it have to be fun or does it have to be realistic or it has to be. But the problem with those lines of thinking are often that realism is something you make up, you choose it. An example of that is now a year ago or so, I played FIFA with a friend. I was visiting them. They said, what we're going to do? Play FIFA. Okay, fine. And there's women's team, so I was like, okay, well, fine. I'll take USA. I mean, they're going to floor everyone anyways. But then my friend took AC Milan, the men's team. They couldn't play against each other because a deliberate choice was made. This is not realistic. So first thing I did was like, okay, fine, I'll choose Portugal. And we'll have 2 Cristiano Ronaldos on the field. So that choice was totally like, see, you choose what you choose not to believe, and using realism as an excuse for immersion is very poor. You can have fun. You don't have to make your, I mean, like if you want a shooter, go play Splash or something, you know, like the Nintendo game with the squids. Does it have to be about war all the time? Like, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of alternatives. And personally, what I look for is something I can just enjoy. But it needs to meet certain ethical standards. Otherwise, I'll look for something else. So, yeah.
I think it's clear from your story that a game stops being enjoyable when you feel really misrepresented in a game, or when you see that people are really being presented in a harmful way. I'm looking to the rest of the panelists. Do you feel the same way, or Lisa?
Not necessarily. It's definitely important if it's a story about humans. But one of the games I enjoy a lot is, for example, Ori and the Blind Forest, where there's no humans in the entire game. And I think it's less of an issue in that game because it still has a beautiful story and beautiful art, and it's still very enjoyable. And it's far away from any, well, real life politics and stories in general.
Okay. Anyone else who wants to react? No? Then we'll take yet another question. I see a question that said, I think it's extremely hard for binary people to understand non-binary people. So not representing them correctly in games might rather just be a case of misunderstanding rather than something really deliberate, so a deliberate mistake. I don't think whether that's really a question or more like a statement, but how do you feel about it? And obviously I'm going to Kira and to Yoona for this one.
I do see Ruth wants to say something.
Ruth, go ahead.
I do. I think it's already a mistake when they don't want to listen to non-binary people and not hire non-binary people for the project itself. Then I think it becomes deliberate, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think ignorance is a poor excuse for the privileged. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
You want to add something to that? Okay, I think we lost them. So we'll go over to next question. Do you think that games allowing to change from male to female or masculine to feminine, or even just letting you choose a body type instead of just a gender, is a step in the right direction? Ruth, back to you.
I personally prefer it. If I have the option to play as a woman, I always get more excited about the game. It doesn't have to be like that, obviously. I'm not going to say, oh, you have to insert women in your game. I like it, and your game will be more on my radar if you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think of it.
I do agree with the last part of it, like just having body types or just, having, but then it has to be fair, it has to be all kinds of body representation. That can't just be like stereotypical stuff. But the changing part, that one gets tricky. I mean, and messy fast, because how do you change? How easy is it? How is it like just a thing? There's this good example about one game where you can change really quickly, just go to this one place and become out a woman or a man, depending on what you went in. But your walking animation changes. You start having a swing of the hips, but you are the same person. So that doesn't make any sense. You don't just suddenly have entirely different animations put on you because you know you're the same person. You're supposed to walk the same way. Yeah, so there's a lot there that needs quite some nuance before you just implement it like that. So yeah.
And just out of curiosity, if you have the ability to choose, what do you go for in a video game? Listen, for example, do you always play like a woman in a game when you get the chance?
I think it depends on the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a MOBA, I will not necessarily always play women because it's more about the abilities that the characters have and how they play and what position they take. But in an MMORPG, I am more likely to play a woman, yes.
Okay. Yoona, how about you?
I tend to always go with something completely different from myself.
Mm-hmm.
I like to play all kinds of different characters. So for me, it's really just adding more tools.
Mm-hmm.
If I can play a non-binary character, that would be great. I've never been able to do it.
Okay. So, last question. What about games that take place in an entirely different time and place? For example, should you integrate non-binary people in a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which takes place in the 9th century, where the non-binary aspect wasn't considered part of society?
Actually, it was considered a part of society, and Vikings did consider non-binary part as a thing.
Mm-hmm.
They even had non-binary gods and gender-fluid gods, such as Loki.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that it is an issue in that game.
No, but so clearly this is a case of not being educated on the Vikings aspect, but the gist of the question still remains. What if we go back to a period where non-binary issues were not being discussed, etc.? Should you have attention for? Should you direct attention to those questions in those periods of times and in those games as well?
I think non-binary people will definitely still have been there, as they have been here through the entirety that there has been humanity. So I think they still belong in a time period. They will just probably be less noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
I also think again it's the
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that you can have non-binary and trans narratives without explicitly using the name non-binary. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly. But also, again, it's a choice, right? I mean, why choose this specific time period when you can create a game that doesn't necessarily have to have taken place in this idealized, personal reimagination of a past time? Like, it's a game. Make it on another planet that has people that look like Vikings and just whatever. Like, you have so many options. This obsession with the past and glorifying it and its violence and its, its historical accuracy. Again, it's, as you just proved, most often than not, there's a lot of ignorance there too. It's not as accurate as people believe it to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, it reminded me of a study I read about. It was an Assassin's Creed game where they explicitly said, well, perhaps we should address those questions in those time periods and reappropriate everything what's happened over there and take games for what they are, simulations where you can play with reality and play with different rule sets, and in this way create a better society even when perhaps it wasn't there at the time. So with this hopeful message, I think we can conclude this this panel discussion. I would love to thank you all for being here, for being this open about your experiences, and for opening up this debate, because I really think that the IA will be able to explore these questions more thoroughly in the next couple of months, years, because there's lots to discuss here, and certainly it's not just finished with having one debate. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you all for joining us in this stream. Thank you all to the panelists, and we'll see you in the next debate, I guess, and the next Game for Thought. And perhaps thank you all for all the people behind the scenes as well, because they are doing a really wonderful job. So thank you very much, and bye.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining this live stream. I hope you had a fun time during this discussion panel and during the presentation of our guest speaker. I hope you join us again for future events. So to discuss a bit more what our future events will look like, on February 18th in 2021, we will have the games and addiction topic discussed during, again, a 1.5 hour panel. Afterwards, in March 18th, we will have ethics, AI, and the progress of technology as a topic during where you will discuss more regarding. And our last one for this academic year, on April 22nd, the social dilemma. So you will hear more from topical experts about social media and privacy and how do we deal with it. So I will go back to Ali to thank you from me and from everyone, to everyone that was included in this discussion and in this panel. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandra. So we hope that you found these discussions insightful. We hope that it gives you food for thought, to play off of the name of this entire series. We just hope that you have some takeaways from this in general. A big thank you to the people that made this possible, as well as the last stream that we did. Thank you to Sandra. Thank you to our colleagues Carlos, Catalina, Alexander, our sound guy, Bert and Luna, who are our tech experts. Thank you so much. And thank you to Rick Linknecht. I always mess up his pronunciation, so sorry, Rick. But thank you so much for basically everything that you have done to make this a success. We really appreciate it. And with that, we really hope that you enjoy the upcoming sessions. And in the meantime, we really hope that you have a happy and healthy and safe holiday season. So thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure as always. Thank you so much as well to, of course, the participants that joined us in this session. We couldn't have done it without you. So thank you to our student participants and Jeroen and Kira as well. Student participants again were Lisa, as well as Yoona and Ruth from journalism. So thank you so much. We hope you have a healthy and happy holiday season.
Happy holidays.